For those of you who follow me on TikTok, you know that I'm currently in love with the relationship between Sally Jackson and Percy Jackson in a new Percy Jackson series, and I wanted to talk about that a bit more today. Hi, I'm Alex Eagleton. I'm a poet, author, writer, and most importantly, I'm currently hyperfixating on the Disney Plus Percy Jackson, the Olympian show. I have been a Percy Jackson fan since I was a kid, and I have read these books countless times. But what I want to be really careful about doing in this series is making sure that I'm not blurring the line between series and books. For as much as I can, the books will be kept separate. I will not be relying on their material. I will not be relying on my knowledge about what happens in the books. All of these videos are going to be exclusively looking at the show. But before we get started, of course, a spoiler warning for episodes 1 and 2 of the Percy Jackson show. Our first introduction of Percy and Sally as characters is actually in a flashback that Percy has at the museum. And this memory that we see is of his mother showing him the statue of Perseus, telling the myth, and Percy himself is very young at this point. He looks maybe 7. Now, before I go anywhere else, this scene is so wholesome, it is ridiculous. And I mean so very wholesome. It's really, really easy for us to see the love that these two people have for each other just throughout the scene. The way that they're looking at each other, the look in Percy and Sally's eye as they see each other is nothing but adoration. And it is gorgeous, and I'm so happy to see that. To my main point, Sally Jackson telling Percy that not everyone who looks like a hero is a hero, and not everyone who looks like a monster is a monster, is so very, very critical for Percy as a lesson. Not only is she teaching him these concepts of compassion and understanding and approaching people in a non-judgmental way, which is just so core to Sally's being, but there's a secondary lesson in there of don't take things at face value, no matter what people tell you. Look deeper. And in the context of the Perseus and Medusa myth, it's so very important because we know that Medusa was a victim. So this presentation of maybe it's not what it seems is so very important for us as a culture to recognize that, we acknowledge that there's more than what meets the eye, and it also recognizes the symbolism and the importance that Medusa has for so many people across the world. The other thing that really stands out to me about this scene is the conversation around the myth itself and the explanations around Perseus and his mother in the original myth. And we can see why it means so much to Sally as she's explaining it to him, especially knowing that Perseus is one of the few heroes that actually has some sort of happy ending. And that's all she wanted for him. When Sally says the words, "hold fast, brave the storm," it becomes a brilliant callback for us later in the episode. But Percy's only thinking of it because he's had that memory. Sally hadn't had that memory. There's no other reason for her to have had that thought and to share that with him in this moment of distress, unless it had previously been said in other moments of distress. And this is what I think is so very brilliant about this scene. It sets up a part of their relationship that we can understand is going to be very constant throughout the next however long. Before the Minotaur fight is not the first time Sally Jackson has said, "hold fast, brave the storm, I love you," to Percy. Guaranteed. There's no way in his troubled life, which he describes himself as struggling to get through, she's not used those words before, especially after we know this moment in the museum is so meaningful. The second scene between them that I really love is the conversation they have in the Cabinet Montauk. Obviously, this is such a critical point in the arc of the episode, but also it's a very good demonstration of who these two are as characters and their relationship to each other. First thing off the bat, Percy's the one who brings up the conversation, and that's so very important in understanding the safety and security that this boy has around his mother. Sally asked him earlier, he said he wasn't ready to talk about it, she didn't push him. And it's not until he broaches the subject again, not until he feels safe and secure and has his thoughts organised enough to have that conversation, that is brought up and Sally accepts that conversation. Understanding that this dynamic of Percy being comfortable of bringing up conversations on his own and not just when he's questioned is so important to understanding their relationship and how heavily they trust each other. Throughout the scene, Percy is vulnerable and scared and uncertain about what is happening to him. But it's also very clear that this is not a new conversation for them. They've had it before, and they're both comfortable talking about how Percy is feeling, and both comfortable in sharing those emotions. The way that Sally responds to every part of this conversation is so very, very perfect. She is kind, understanding, compassionate, and constantly supportive the entire time as she tries to explain something very complicated to Percy. He's just a 12-year-old kid, and she has to explain that this entire world that he didn't know about exists. That's terrifying for her and for him. But she does explain, and that's the important thing. And we know that if Grover hadn't shown up, she would have answered all of his questions and told him everything. But plot has to plot. And whilst Percy is scared and vulnerable, so is Sally. She isn't doing anything to put all of her emotions on her son, but she also isn't hiding all of her emotions. You can see that she is annoyed with herself when she mentions Mrs. Dodds, that she stumbles over her words as she's trying to explain Poseidon and her relationship with him. She speaks awkwardly, stumbles over her words, and this is a conversation she's been terrified to have. So it makes sense that her anxiety is coming out in this way, but still, to some extent, controlled. And I think one of the most notable moments of this scene is when she expresses her sadness and her love for Percy. The "oh, baby, no" is heartbreaking. And anyone who says otherwise, they didn't watch it properly. As much as we see Percy expressing his emotions to his mother in a really, really healthy way, we also see his mother expressing them back in a similarly healthy way. And that is so very important, and it demonstrates to us how important these two are to each other. The third scene I'd like to bring up in discussion about their relationship doesn't actually feature Sally at all. It is the scene in the second episode where Percy prays to her and makes the small offering of the blue jelly beans. And now this is an incredibly wholesome scene, and what gets me more than anything is the normalcy about it. For Percy, this is just another phone call the first night at a new school, and the miraculous thing is that it's positive. It isn't about how the kids are mean and awful and he feels unsafe and just wants to come home. He feels like he's made friends. He feels safe, and that is so very important. The conversation then turns interesting as Percy becomes angry, and we can see the fury and the rage in his eyes as he starts talking about Poseidon, or whoever his father is at this point, not showing up. And he doesn't care so much about Poseidon having neglected him or ignoring him, but it's his mother that he can't stand by anyone ignoring or neglecting. And it just demonstrates once more that this devotion that he has to her is not only "I love you so much," it's "I will tear down the world for you, and I don't care if there are gods in the way." It's the rage and the determination we see in this scene that Percy has to honour Sally's memory and who she was as a person, make sure she's respected and recognised, that drives everything else for his motivations for the rest of the series. Nothing else changes for Percy until he realises, oh, maybe there is a way to save my mum. And we see that at the end of the second episode in the argument with Chiron and Mr. D. Percy will do nothing unless there's a chance to save his mother. He doesn't care about his father in any way, shape or form because he's disrespected everyone that matters to him. And while this type of loyalty isn't solely reserved for his mother, it's never as potent as it is for his mother. We see at the start of the first episode, Percy has a similar sense of loyalty and protectiveness over Grover, and we can see how they interact with Nancy Bobblefoot, and whether it's the first time in the cafeteria or outside the museum, we can see he's very, very protective of Grover, just not to the same extent as Sally. But that's really, really simple to understand. Percy and Grover have only been friends for a year at this point, but Sally's always been there, and we know she has always been an exceptional mother, always compassionate, always understanding, and we can see just how significant this relationship is between us. Something that helps the audience connect these scenes is the use of lighting throughout them. In each of these three scenes, the lighting is soft and warm and cozy and comforting, and we feel safe in them. At the museum, when they are silhouetted by the sun and the lights, there's no harshness to it. It's soft and it's warm, and the silhouette just adds a comfort to it, a small glow. There's no lens flares, there's nothing shining into your eyes really, really harshly. And it's very similar across all the other scenes. The cabin, cozy, fireplace, lamps, candles, it's just so warm, and they're on the couch. We feel invited into this space, we feel safe because we understand what this lighting and what these characters mean. And it's the same thing in the forest when Percy makes that sacrifice. It's smaller and more dense, but Percy doesn't feel alone in that moment. He's there with his mother in the flames, and there is still that warmth throughout most of the scene. And it's only after he blows out the fire that we get that sense of isolation. And that's because he's no longer communing with his mother. Should we compare this to the scene with the Minotaur? Again, it's a very, very important scene for Percy and Sally. It's the scene where Sally dies. So there are similarities to the lighting, really heavy yellow tones being one of them. However, the light is no longer soft. It's harsh, it hurts, it casts really, really deep shadows and makes things unclear. Compare the silhouetting in the museum to the Minotaur fight. Sally and Percy are silhouetted, we see every detail of their face in the museum. They're shadowed in the Minotaur fight, and there are shots where we can't even see any of Sally's facial features. What this does for an audience is we go, okay, we have similar colours, similar characters, we know this is a big moment, but it's harsher, so the situation is more dangerous. And that clicks something in our brain, even if we don't realise it. Obviously, it's a big situation, right? The Minotaur tells us that. But so does the lighting, so does the music, so does everything. Percy and Sally's relationship, I believe, will be the most important relationship throughout the course of this season. Yes, there's going to be bits and pieces between Percy and Annabeth and Percy and Grover and Percy and everyone else, because it's Percy, but nothing motivates him like his mother. Everything that Percy does in this season is because of his mother, and we can see that already in the first 2 episodes. That's all I've got for now. I'd love to know what you guys are thinking about this relationship, so let me know in the comments. I'll try to be in there and have as many conversations with you all as possible. I'm very in love with both of these characters and the show overall. Thanks for joining me.